Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. My name is Abby Steele, and in today's session, we're going to be thinking about purposeful phonics display and visual supports. So bear with me while I get my slides. Here we are. And this session will be no longer than an hour, will be up to an hour. So phonics display and visual supports. Why have a session on phonics display? Because it might seem something that's really obvious. You're teaching phonics, you're going to put things up on the wall that are going to support with phonics, you're going to put the code, the letters and the sounds, put some tricky words. So why am I even doing this session? Big fat hint, it is not to encourage beautiful classrooms. So I'm sorry, I maybe should have made that clearer before you signed up to watch this session. That this webinar is not about inspiring you to create arty, beautiful display boards. Actually, it's the opposite. It's to give you food for thought and to get you really thinking about whether some of the displays you have might be very beautiful. You might have worked really hard on them, but are they working hard for you and are they serving the children well? Are we getting the maximum benefit from them that we can? So we're not talking about beautiful displays. You can go on Google or on Pinterest and have a look at an abundance of those and get some creative ideas. And you probably already have loads of creative ideas. This is about, with everything I do with phonics, stripping it right back and really getting down to the nitty gritty of what's helpful and what's good practice, what's useful. So I feel quite strongly about this actually, although I did have a bit of a sleepless night last night thinking, oh gosh, it's a really uncomfortable thing to say to people. Yep, that phonics display is beautiful, but actually it's not really useful. So I do feel uncomfortable about saying it, but it's what I do. I'm devil's advocate. I like to provoke. I like to make people think more deeply. Phonics displays are often a missed opportunity. They can be really valuable, but often I see that they're not being used to full effect. They might be beautiful, but they might have little to no value at all. I think that people don't value the use of displays enough. They're massively undervalued. People just don't realise we're so busy being teachers. We're so busy just getting on with our daily life, doing the actual teaching, that the phonics and the display side of things on the wall can become a bit of an afterthought, actually, and not surprising why. But they can be really, really powerful. It's one of your best teaching tools. It's like a hidden trick, a hidden tip that can have a really big impact. And the impact can be instantaneous. So it's a quick win. It's a quick win for you personally as a teacher. It's a quick win for a school as a way of, for example, somebody like me coming in to see how phonics is going in your school, and I can instantly see the impact that your display is having on your learners when they're referring to it and engaging with it. So what do I mean by display and visual support? I'm talking about what you have in your classroom on the walls and what you might have in hallways, in communal spaces, in breakout spaces, sort of around the school and in other areas. I'm talking about those classroom walls across the school. So we're thinking about the progression. What does it look like in different classes? I'm thinking about desktop supports, so sounds mats, and sometimes people put sounds mats inside planners or journals, so that support as well. We're thinking about display in terms of permanent displays. What do we just have up on our walls all the time in our classrooms and around our school? And what might we display cumulatively? We add to it over time as we're teaching. And what might we change? How often might we change these displays? I came from a generation of teaching where one of the first things I did was I went out and I literally bought books on how to do beautiful displays. It was a thing. I don't think that's a thing anymore, but it was a thing. You would buy these books and it would show you all these lovely displays and you would try and replicate and you would try and copy those. And I was in a generation where we were under pressure to have our classrooms beautiful all the time, really immaculate displays, and that you had to change them every half term. So every 6 weeks, you had to tear it all down and put up a new display and sort of keep it fresh and keep it looking really smart. And actually, that's not sensible for workload at all. I'm really big on reducing workload. So we'll think about not changing our displays quite so often. So 11 big mistakes. Here are things that I see when I visit classrooms that I think, oh, you've missed a trick there. It could be a little bit more effective. dangling butterflies and the books I bought. So I had all these books as a new teacher, and I would literally try and copy these displays. And there was lots of sugar paper and lots of making things 3D by kind of bending it and folding it and stapling it in. I used to make those displays, and I used to have in my classroom literally dangling butterflies. So this particular classroom I'm thinking of, although I've done it in many classrooms, I was in an old church building. So I had extremely high ceilings with these kind of roof beams, these rafters across the top. It was a lovely room. The acoustics were not great, admittedly, but it was a beautiful room. And of course, I wanted to make it a really welcoming, lovely space. And the fact that it was a church, an old church hall, it was a bit of a daunting area for children, actually. I wanted to try and close it in a little bit by having quite a lot on display. And so I had these butterfly shapes that I had printed off. That are quite commonly used. You might see butterflies. I think at one time I used hot air balloon shapes, variety of different shapes. And these butterflies were dangling on ribbons from the ceiling. They looked beautiful. And of course, they would blow around in the breeze. So they actually weren't positioned somewhere where children could see them or refer to them at all. They were just flapping. They were just decoration. They had on them the phonics. They had the letter sounds. But of course, the background of the butterfly was really colourful, and the font on those butterflies was white. And I see this all the time, these beautiful shapes, flapping and dangling, colourful background, white font. And when it's a white font on a colourful background, it just doesn't make that letter shape pop out at all. And of course, that's what you want the children to be seeing, the letter shape, so they can see the letter shape, and it promotes the sort of saying the sound, so a reading skill, blending skill. Oh, that's or that they're writing and they're thinking, oh, I really need to remember what the shape looks like. Oh, I know, I can look at my phonics display and I can quickly look and reference and find that shape, and then I want to copy and write that shape, so I need to be able to look at it for a little while I transfer and develop this skill of being able to copy. And white fonts are really difficult to find and to look at. Too high up or obscured behind something else. So I had my butterflies really high up. Even if the children were sitting down and looking up, arching their neck, they actually still couldn't see them at all. It was ridiculous. But it is a huge challenge that we face, having things clearly. Our classrooms, even schools where classes have been built, brand new schools, they are not designed by teachers. Of course, they are designed by architects. So they're not thinking about good wall space and display space. And every single class I go in and I look and say, oh gosh, I'm really sorry for you that you've got this shape of room, or you've got that pillar right there, or you've got that window really annoyingly in that space. You don't have a good space for displaying things. So we are absolutely up against it, and I'm really aware of that. Part of thinking about displays and purposeful displays, it's troubleshooting, it's problem solving. And that's one of the reasons that I can't come to you and say, here is the perfect display, the model display. This is what I think you should have it looking like in your room, because every single room is completely different, and you will have to troubleshoot the space that you've got and prioritize what it is that you want to have up and sort of where you're going to put it. So I do often see things, it might be quite a nice clear display. Maybe it's not dangling butterflies or white font, but it's obscured behind a pillar or a corner, and therefore it's really pointless. Children can't actually see it. And then an absolute biggie, this is a really important one, is that the displays aren't referred to. So it's almost like, yes, we are putting them up to kind of look pretty and give a gesture towards having something up there. We hope that children will look at them and notice them. And some children do. Some children are more observant than others. But a lot of other children, unless you teach them to use that display and to refer to it, they just don't even refer to it. And I've got some sort of tips coming up later about how we can address that, and a little story coming up about a true story, something that happened with Ofsted, where the children weren't referring to the display. So displays not being referred to, just literally being wallpaper, which there is also an argument for. So being devil's advocate, thinking of both sides of this, like I said about my church classroom not being quite the most inviting space, part of you as a teacher will be thinking, I want my children to feel welcome, to feel this is their space, take ownership of it. I want them to enjoy it. And we like things looking nice. We like to have our homes looking really lovely and personalised and beautiful, and have nice wallpaper or cushions or decoration. And so we do also want that for the children, whether we're going for quite a kind of bright, poppy, kind of, bright primary colours and more going on, or whether we're going down the route of a lot of people are into the neutrals, the Hessian and the black and the silver and that sort of natural woods. Whichever way you're going for it, you are trying to make it look nice, absolutely. But it's about sort of distinguishing between, these are the bits that I'm doing because I want it to look really pretty, and that's fine. And these are the bits that I'm doing that maybe look less pretty, or I'll try and make it look as pretty as possible. But the usefulness comes first. We're prioritizing that. And phonics is the one to do that for. So carrying on, another classic. So obviously the dangling butterflies, that I have made that mistake many times myself as a newer, younger teacher. Also, I see a display called Sea of Sounds. And it's a classic one. It probably came from a book, and then people have sort of replicated it. A big display board, and it looks like a sea or an ocean. So you've got some lovely sort of blue colours and sparkly colours and sequiny bits. And then you might have lots of the letters and the sounds kind of popped in there. But it's thinking about, it's beautiful. It's got those lovely colours, those lovely shapes. It's a sea of sound. It's a lovely kind of way of thinking about it. But are they clear enough? Are they a bit too small? Have they got a good strong font? Are they in a sort of logical order, or are they a bit random? Are the actual letters and sounds, the sort of cards they're on, lost in the lovely seascape? Or phonics tree is another classic one that I see. So people will have made a really beautiful tree trunk going up, brown paper, or sometimes 3D, and the leaves of the tree, whether it's flat against the wall or whether they're actually dangling into the classroom, which looks beautiful. And I've seen it kind of coming over like a canopy over a reading core or a phonics area, and they have green leaves dangling down, but often with that white font on again, and the green leaves are kind of spinning and twisting. So illegible fonts. One of the things to be thinking about, and when we get onto sort of tips of, well, what would you put, Abby? How would you have your phonics display? One of the things to think about is the fonts that you're using. And sometimes because we are in a rush, we're really time pressured in the classroom. And sometimes because we are really pleased to have found a display that we can just print off and it's kind of ready done, those leaves are ready done with that font on, we don't think enough about, well, is this the right font that I want to be showing my children? If this phonics display is showing them the graphemes, the letter shapes, and the purpose of the display is to help them with their reading or with their spelling, so they're looking at those shapes and I want them to say the sound, like it's like a flashcard skill, but they're doing it themselves because they're looking at the display in their own time. Or is it spelling because they're thinking about, oh, I'm writing the word snail and I know that I need A, but I just can't quite remember which A that I need. So they want a reference, they know the sound, and they want to quickly find the grapheme that they need. If that's the purpose, which it mostly is with a phonics display, then do you need the font to be that precursive font? The precursive font, if that's the style that your school uses, is about the handwriting. And it's a different shape that children are learning for reading. And so this is part of the argument. This is part of why in the reading framework and sort of phonics validation and phonics experts are talking about, please drop those lead-ins, please drop that precursive. Our little tinies and our weaker learners, those that take a bit longer to get to grips with phonics, need things as clear as possible, as consistent as possible. And when they read their reading books, when we get them on their first level of reading books, the font in the reading books is print. It's not got any cursive-y bits on it. So that's what they really need to be seeing on their phonics flashcards. That's what they need to be seeing on their phonics display. Obviously, it's a within school decision, but I see a lot of inconsistency about that. So somebody might have used cursive-y fonts for one display, but then print font for another display, and then another display is in capitals, but is that for the purpose of capitals, or is it just what the font was? And we have absolutely moved away from the days of, and again, yes, this was my generation, Comic Sans everything. There was a time when we said, all displays must be in Comic Sans font because that is much more child friendly. We've got the proper round A, everything in that font. And I don't agree with that. I do think it's really good for children to see lots of different fonts because as they become more mature readers, they're going to move to books that have got the sort of Roman Times Roman where it flips over the top of the A and the G is a squirrely G. So they do need to be prepared for these other fonts. And when they are out in the environment, signs, lots of signs have got lots of different fonts. So it is good practice to have lots of fonts, but we need to make sure that they are legible, they are clear to see, and that we've had a little bit of thought about, well, why have we got those fonts? What was our decision in that process? Or is it just because that's how it came and I had to make something quickly? Too small, oh my goodness, this is maybe the number one. The number one mistake that I see is that I can see displays that have been thought about really carefully. People have really thought about what it is they want to display. They've tried to make it very visually clear and accessible. They've tried to think about layout and where it, not too high up, not dangling butterflies, not all of that color, not white font, but everything's small and tiny. And even if it maybe felt big when you printed it off or you got it ready, when it's up on that wall, actually it's very, very small unless you are right up in front of that wall. So for a child sitting back in the classroom on the carpet area during an input, or when they're at the desk, or when they're just in the classroom, it's so small that it all just kind of merges into the rest of everything else. That is a huge challenge for us again, because space. There is a lot of information that we want to put on the walls, but our space is so limited. So if we go bigger, we're not going to be able to put as much up. So we tend to go smaller to put more up. But if we've gone smaller to put more up, but we can't see it, was there any point? So this is that I don't have all the answers. I'm just, getting us thinking about this and talking about this. Linked a little bit to the too small is the chaos, the overload, too much. And in recent years, people have been much more reflective on, is this overload in terms of stimulation? So for children who might have additional needs, sensitivities, for example, might get overloaded and overwhelmed. Is it too much to have loads of colours and loads of shapes and just loads going on, and it all becomes noise and it's quite hard to sort of work through? And so as a profession, we've been really good at reflecting on that. And as I mentioned earlier, some people therefore have gone down a route of stripping back display, making it more neutral, more natural, lots of natural words, lots of calm. But I see a little bit of a mistake here, which kind of, it's not amusing. It is amusing, it's not amusing. I feel a bit like, oh guys, like you're aiming for the right thing, you're thinking about the right things, but all you've done is swap chaotic colourful for chaotic neutrals. There's still too much there. It's still too small. It's still dangling and flapping. It's still illegible fonts. It's not readable. And who is it helping? So although it's neutralized, it's not actually less stimulating for learners who are finding that hard to navigate. And it just becomes then wallpaper. So, and that's really hard. Like, I feel like I can say it to you in this session because, well, you voted to come here and listen to this. And also I'm being non-specific, I'm being non-personal, I hope. But, I hope that people will start to think about that, yes, those neutrals are beautiful. That's a lovely palette. Still too much going on. Still really busy and really chaotic. So too much sometimes. Pretty displays. And we've mentioned that, this balance of course, we want things to look attractive and we want things to look nice. We want our space to be welcoming, but that can't be the priority when it comes to phonics. Poor use of space. Sometimes, because things are small, it's not about that the teacher is trying to cram a lot into that space. I want to display loads of phonics, but I've only got a small board. So I've got to maximize it by having a little bit smaller, but fill the board with it, but very clearly. Sometimes, actually, a really big display board, things very small, scattered around or in the middle, and loads of space, which could be maximized a bit better. But we are teachers and we are not necessarily designers or artists. some people are really good at and love creating displays. They have a really good vision for it. They're good at judging space. They can look at a board, look at the size of, for example, their phonics cards and go, yep, I reckon I can fit 12 across there. Or they'll take the time to kind of blue tack them in. I'm terribly impatient. I'm a bit slapdash and just get it on the wall and not worry about it looking so neat. But I wish I was neater. I wish I was better at that. So that's a really hard one as well. This, poor use of space because we're time poor, because we're not necessarily good at judging that space. Important one to think about from a point of view of whole school consistency and phonics leadership and sort of supporting our colleagues across the school is sometimes I see great phonics displays, but actually what I see is that the phonics display, perhaps, for example, in year 1, is more ambitious, more mature than the display in year 2 or year 3. And sometimes it might be because of the fonts or because of the content. It looks like the progression is going backwards. We haven't got consistency across the school. And it might be not a lack of consistency in terms of literally the quality and what it looks like and what it contains, or it might be in terms of kind of like the progression. It literally looks like, you're not moving forwards any further. And then another one, which is really hard for us in the classroom, isn't it? Because we're dealt with what we get. But I think it's worth, and I hope that perhaps this session is something that gives you a bit of welly, a bit of, you're able to go back to your leadership team or to your management and say, do you know what? Abby pointed out in the session that we listened to that actually it really matters, these phonics displays. They can have a really big impact. And our printer is awful. Our printer never has colour ink, or you never let us print with colour ink. And when we do, it's not printing out in great quality, but we're under pressure to have these displays up and ready, and you want everything lovely in the school. But what's the point? Because it's so faded that kids can hardly read it, or it's all blotchy and it's all scrappy, and I haven't got time to redo this, and it's not my responsibility as a teacher to look at the quality of the printer. It's not my responsibility as a teacher to go and print all of my display at home, which, yes, I have fallen foul of many a time, doing it on my home printer, spending hours laminating, cutting and making it really beautiful. We shouldn't have to do that. And so I hope that you're able to go back and say, look, Abby really said this is really important stuff. We need to get our printer sorted. Or can we investigate as a school using a commercial printer? Down the road, there's a print shop, and if we provide them with the files that we want printed, they will print them the size that we want them, which might be bigger than our school printer, and we'll get them in really high quality colour. Is that an option for us in our school? And often heads, if they think that it's going to be a quick win, they're just, what's it going to cost me? What's it going to cost me to have the effectiveness and the impact in the classroom? What's it going to cost me that people are impressed and children are showing great progress? And then they'll consider it. So that was all my kind of like moan. These are all the things that I see going a bit wrong. It really isn't our fault as a profession. It's just we're under a lot of pressure. So now let's kind of turn it to the positive. So what can we do about it? What should we be thinking about? And there are 6 top tips that I have for you. I know there were 11 negative moans, but they were each one a small thing to be very specific. And these 6 top tips will kind of umbrella over and encompass more of those ideas, bigger concepts. So here are some practical things that I hope that you will think about and reflect upon for your practice. So number 1, actually planning what to display. You might need to go back to your management and say, this is so important. Abby suggested that we're actually given some time as a staff. Maybe we could have a staff meeting or a department meeting, but you need to give us some time, please. We need to sit down together as a team and we need to thrash out. We need to really plan what we are going to display in our school. What's our approach and our policy? And to help you think about that, well, what do your children need? Do you have an intake of children who are lots of English as an additional language, and you need lots more vocabulary support in your environment? How much of the phonics code do you need? Do you need a lot more on tricky words or common exception words or words commonly misspelled? Are you focusing on the code? What is it? What would be age appropriate for each of our classes? Let's talk about that. And what might we need on display for children with additional needs? How can we make sure that our display materials support both the mainstream pathway, that progression that we're on, the age expected route, but also children who might need something that has actually come from a previous year group because that's what they're still working on. What does your phonics program provide? So that's often a starting point is, well, a lot of schools now have a commercialized phonics program. And if you don't have a commercialized phonics program, have you made things? Have you gathered things from elsewhere? What visual display support do you have at your fingertips? Is it right for you? Do you need to adapt it at all? Can you just pop it on the wall as it is? Or do you need to make it bigger, make it smaller? Think about how much of it goes up. Have you got, does your program tell you explicitly, this is what you must put up, this is what it must look like? Or have you got that discretion? And I would argue that we need to have some discretion here because of our literal physical space layout, who we've got in our classroom. We need to be not following the instructions robotically. You must put this poster on the wall. We need to be able to think about, I'm going to put that poster on the wall here because that's going to benefit my children for X, Y, Z reason. So what does your phonics program provide? What doesn't your phonics program provide? Because publishers, with the best will in the world, obviously they want to provide you with as much value as possible, as many things to be helpful as possible. But there's always going to be a business element to it. There's always going to be a cost efficiency. So phonics programs are likely to provide you with a couple of versions or a couple of types of display resource. But if that's not quite hitting the mark for what you need right now for your children, it is appropriate to make adaptations or to perhaps use some other things that you have. Now, here you have to be a little bit careful with that fidelity. What we don't want is that you're following one phonics program and then you're using, for example, a wall freeze that comes from a different phonics program, and therefore it has different order of teaching or different mnemonic system. It has actions or ditties or pictures that don't actually correlate to what it is that you're teaching in your program. So we don't want to mix and match brands, but if you have a wall freeze that is the perfect size that you really like, it's pretty plain, it hasn't got specific program commercial branding, it's kind of like a letters and sounds generic thing, and it matches the order of your teaching, and the mnemonic system matches up absolutely fine, then you don't need to get rid of that. You could still be using that, but you need to have a discussion through the school to make sure it's consistent. Anyway, so what have you got? What haven't you got? What might you need? You need to be able to justify your choices, and sometimes that might go against what you think I'm saying, because actually you're taking ownership and saying, no, this is how I want it to be. This is what I need for my children. So a little example, I've waffled on a lot about don't have things flapping in the wind, don't have things in white font, don't have things too small, have things that are going to be really valuable for children that they can access, they can see it, it provides help for them. So one display I've come across once in an early years setting. It was in the water area. They had a sink area, sink and a draining board, and they had a water tray, and it was like a zone, a water zone. And around the sink, on kind of the splashback area, and around the edge of the water tray, there were some water vocabulary words. So things like drip drop, splish splash, wet, water, cold, warm, sprinkle, pour, loads of vocabulary around water. And they were on water droplet shapes, so blue water droplet shapes, and it was white writing on these cards, but actually it was, when you looked at them, it was quite clear to see. The white font had a clear outline and the blue wasn't overpowering and you could read the word. But of course, in this early years setting, and I think actually it was even a nursery, an F1 setting, the children were not going to be able to read those words on those rain droplets. And so you can imagine that somebody might come in and say, why have you got words around this water area? What's the point? Because you are not expecting your children to learn those words or read those words. We're not learning sight vocabulary. They're not there in their phonics. So why have you bothered putting words there? Wouldn't it be better to not bother with those and just enjoy the water space without constantly kind of thrusting the literacy onto them? And those water words, they're going to get wrecked pretty quickly because they're going to get wet. You're going to have to replace them anyway. So why bother putting these words there? So you might think that's what I would say. And I'm saying, actually, no, this is a lovely visual support for the adults in the room. This visual display isn't for the children. You know, fine, you might have an Alice. Alice is a girl I always talk about in my stories who came to me from nursery reading and writing. She was exceptionally bright. She would have been able to read those words. So for her, it is a little bit of challenge, a bit of interest with the vocabulary. But the purpose of those words is that when an adult, any adult, a visitor, an inspector, a school improvement advisor, a helper, a teaching assistant, a teacher, a student teacher, when they are in that area with those children, at their fingertips, they've got this lovely array of language that reminds them of the language that they can be talking about with children. And sometimes we're just busy in our world, and even if we think that we've got a really great vocabulary ourselves and we're very good at talking with children and developing them and saying, oh, you know, let's sprinkle the water from the watering can. How does the water feel? Is it cold? Is it warm? And can you hear it dripping and dropping when I drip it like this? You know, we might be very good and natural at that, but sometimes we're just not in the zone for it. Sometimes we've got other things going on in our head, and to have those words there, it's a way that you can remind yourself, and it's a way that you can be supporting other adults in your setting. So that's absolutely justified. I'm going to keep those words, and if somebody questions me on that, I've got a reason as to why I have those words. So planning what to display. Don't start with planning pretty. Step away from Pinterest. Step away from Google search for images. As a starting point, start with a blank slate and what do we want to have on display, rather than, which I've done a million times because you want some inspiration, looking up and Googling displays. And it's one of the reasons that I have not put into this slide deck visuals of, oh, have a look at this display, have a look at this display, have a look at this display. I don't want you to see those displays and go, oh yeah, that's a good idea, I'll replicate that. I want you to start with a blank sheet and think about what your display will look like. So number 2, give phonics your very best space. And I know that you know that, of course, I'm going to say this because I love phonics and I, say it's so important. But it is so important. What is the number one thing we want for our children? We want them to have communication skills. We want them to be able to communicate as humans through speaking and listening, and through reading and through writing. And so, the number one thing we want for them to achieve while they're in their environment with us is this literacy, these literacy skills. It is the most important thing. Therefore, we've got to give it our absolute biggest, best space available. We've got to reimagine our classroom. So you look around and you think, well, where have I got a really prominent, accessible wall? A wall that is either so big that I can have a big display, or it's got a space that is lower down where I can go smaller, but it really is at children's accessibility height. They can see it very clearly. Now, in a perfect world, that would be at the front of the classroom, so you can be pointing to it and to referring to it. But in reality, most of us have got interactive whiteboards, then we've got writing on whiteboard, then we've got something else and something else. Like, we don't have often a good space at the front of the room. There's a lot going on there. So for me, my go-to space is most often the wall to the side. I'm going to look to the side. Often there's windows on one side. I'm going to look to the side. Have I got a big prominent display space? If my room doesn't have a good space at the front or the side, but it has a good space at the back, there's a great big wall at the back, I would prioritize having that great big space and make that my phonics and my literacy wall, even though it's at the back of the room and children have to turn around. I walk around a lot in the classroom anyway, so I was saying, right, everybody turn around, everybody have a look at this, look on this on the display. I would prefer it to be the back wall than for it to be the front and side, but be very bitty and kind of around other things and very sort of complicated. So when you're thinking about prioritizing your classroom space, you might be thinking, oh, but I've got loads of things that I want to display, and I really want to put up things like children's work to celebrate it. And I also think that is incredibly important. When we think about the value and purpose of displays, literacy and phonics support, number 1. Maths support, a close second. Number 3, celebrating children's work. Artwork, fabulous work, success work, golden work, our best work, that kind of thing. Anything else is often not accessible for children anyway. It's more for adults to show them what we've been doing. So it's a waste of space. But art galleries can go down the corridors in the hallway. You know, that is the exact best space to put all the artwork or the celebratory work or the wonderful pieces of writing down your corridors, in your communal areas, in your hallway. That's brilliant for sharing because more people are going to get to see it. And you can tell your children, the walls here, this is to help us while we're learning. The walls out there, that's to showcase and show everybody our wonderful stuff. So thinking about our best space in the classroom, children have to be able to see it clearly or it is completely pointless. You need to be able to refer to the display with ease or it is completely pointless. So if you can't access it or you're struggling to refer to it, or it's so high and so small that you're saying, oh yeah, it's the one in between that, it's up there. If you can't just point to it and say, that's the one I'm telling you about, then is it the best space for that? Number 3, leadership. So even if you're not the phonics leader, even if you are a self-contained classroom teacher, actually in an unofficial capacity, the fact that you've been interested enough to come and listen to this session, you are able to cascade out some messages to your school and you are able to support your colleagues. So you're doing some leadership there. We're all leaders anyway. Or you might be the actual phonics leader and coming for some sort of guidance on that. Now, thinking about leadership, some pointers for that. We've got to be extremely respectful about dictating display requirements. I think if I went back to full-time classroom teaching, when I would go to an interview, I would actually, they say, have you got any questions for us? I do have a question for you. In this school, is it mandatory the displays I have to have? Am I in a multi-academy trust where you are going to tell me I must have this science display with these boxes on, with these words on, and this art display, and this English display, and this maths, and this? Are you going to stipulate and dictate to me the displays I need to have in my classroom? Now, for some teachers, they might go, actually, that saves a whole lot of hassle. I'm just going to do what I'm told. And if I just do what I'm told, happy days. I don't need to think about this. I could not do it. I would ask that question in interview, are you going to stipulate? And if they say, well, yes, we're very proud of our display policy, and we have this manual about how you should have your displays, and all of your borders should be red with wavy lines with a silver behind that and blue in the middle, and these words in these fonts, just no thanks, that is not for me. Because often the people who have designed those displays have not got the same experience as some of us that are on the ground, the practitioners. They don't know our space. They don't know our children. They don't know what their children need for their phonics. And so I'm not going to battle with them about what I have to have on display. However, if you're leading in a school, of course you're going to be thinking about advising and guiding colleagues and supporting colleagues who are less confident at creating displays or less interested. You know, some of us are just not that way inclined. So you might want to provide some kind of requirements, a guidance document. In our school, these are the things that we think about with the display. Actually, we would expect you in your classroom to have, as a minimum, these different things, you know, the letters and the sounds for the part of the code you're working on, the tricky words that you're working on, the spelling word bank that you're working on. We do require these things. You might have to give more support and a bit more specifics on what you want that to look like, because actually the danger in giving free rein is that some teachers are naturally amazing at display and some teachers struggle with it, and then that doesn't have the impact in those classrooms and the lack of consistency is there. But it's not easy, it's complicated, but always we've got to be respectful, always respectful, not sweeping in with these are our non-negotiables. These are our mandatory requirements for how you must have your display. We've got to be sensitive about it because classrooms are teachers' personal spaces. It's a very personal thing. And I hate being told what to do, as you can imagine. I hate being told how my chairs have to be. I hate being told how I have to teach and I have to follow a script, because I'm a professional and I came into the profession to be a professional, and I got qualified and I got loads of experience. So let me be a professional. So it's a delicate thing. So be respectful. Absolutely take the time to explain or document, or both, your rationale. In our school, we ask that you display this in your classroom because this supports the phonics program. It's what we do, it's what our program says, or this supports children with their reading, or this supports children with their spelling, so that teachers don't feel bullied into a corner of having to display something and they don't know why you want them to display that. I had a B, but I can't remember B. But you just don't want people to think, to go into that kind of like not engaging with their display because they're just automatically putting out what you've told them. Absolutely discussion. Discussion is always really good. It's the reason that even though I had wobbles about whether I should do this session because it's personal, criticizing displays, I thought, this is what I do. We're a team. You're my team. We're discussing it. Even though it's one way and we're not interacting, we can discuss it. You can come back to me with questions and comments, get in touch with me and say, don't like what you said. Can we unpick that a bit more? Discussion is really healthy. And it might, inform the way you think. I might have said something that you think, yeah, that's good. You go back and discuss it with your team and you all come out with a different conclusion. That's fine. That's ownership. That's professionalism. Be really understanding that some teachers can really struggle with space and sizing and colour and layout. Some people have just got an awful lot going on. Teaching is a very stressful profession to be in. And you can have a teacher who is an outstanding practitioner, but they're just not naturally inclined when it comes to space and sizing and display. That's not their forte. And really, remember back in the day when we had those manifestos about how teachers would no longer have to do displays, because we all spent hours putting up really fancy displays. And then they said, no, teachers shouldn't have to do that in their directed time. Like, teaching assistants can do that for you. And actually, it's kind of like a personal thing. Sometimes you find that you might get a teaching assistant who's incredibly skilled. They're very artistic. You might need to rein them in and say, I don't want dangling butterflies. I just need this plain stuff. But you've got the skills to lay that out and it look, really nice, to hit the mark. So we need to help one another with that and be really understanding of that teacher hasn't done a rubbish display because they didn't care or because they didn't listen to you. They literally are struggling with how to lay that out. Be crystal clear. So we cannot ever underestimate the power of giving an example. This is what I mean, which is terrible because I haven't put an example into this session, but I will talk about this more on places like social media, and I will start to share some examples of this is what a really good display looks like. We're actually in the process of moving house, and when I move to my new house, I'm going to have a bigger office with a kind of boardroom, and I'm going to have wall space, so I will create some sort of mock-up displays, and then I'll put some examples of that out. But it might be that you, as the leader or the lead person on this, you do your display and your classroom the way that you think, this is very purposeful now. And then you invite other staff to come and see that room and say, look, this is an example of what it should look like, can look like. And let me know if you want me to come to your classroom and help you troubleshoot your spacing and your, areas that you've got. By all means, you could take photographs and put it in documentation, but be careful about that, being respectful about dictating. But be really clear, because you might think that you've explained well about how you want the displays to be, and it may not have been heard. Consider, I'm not asking you to do this because I do believe in less workload, consider providing pre-made packs for teachers, especially if you can persuade your management to let you use a printer down the road to print off for you what you need, so it's really good quality and the right sizes. Think how amazing that would be if whenever you get sorted, whether you get sorted for going back to school in September, or whether you get sorted at the end of the year in July, or whether you do it midway through the year ready for the next year. Imagine being able to hand over to your teachers, here is your pack, it's all been printed off, it's the right size, it's the right color, it's the right stuff that you need, here is your stuff, you just need to put it up on the wall or ask a teaching assistant to put it up on the wall. So yes, a bit of an extra job for us, and I don't want you spending infinite days at home laminating and cutting and doing all that yourselves, but if you have staff that need more support, that can be a way of helping and getting consistency in a kind of subtle backdoor way. And then you need to think about monitoring. Again, not like a dictator, not going around with a whipping stick, being the phonics police. Oh, that display is not good enough. Oh, I don't like that display. Because as much as I'm bringing you these ideas of, those 11 mistakes that I see, I don't walk around schools saying that ever. It's far too personal to criticize in that way. So you want to monitor and talk about the positives. I really like the way you've done that display. That is really clear for the children to be able to see it. That type of thing, and sort of breathe that positivity and show good examples. And so you will want to monitor, have learning walks, whether you do that as a planned activity. I'm coming on a learning walk. I'm going to be looking at environments. I'm going to be looking at your displays, and I'm going to be looking for, are they accessible? Are the children interacting with them and using them? Are they clear? Do you have all the things up that I've asked you to put up? But be careful that it's not about compliance, it's about supporting to get all those things up and ready. Okay. Consistency. So it's a really important thing and a top tip. I've heard about it being mentioned before in inspections. Make sure that the displays you have in the classroom are mirrored in displays that you might have in communal areas or breakout areas or intervention areas. A lot of teaching now in phonics is moving towards a model where you try very hard to avoid having a group stuck in a corridor, sat down in a little cubby hole over there. We're trying to keep very inclusive and go for whole class teaching with differentiation within the class, but you may still have a support room for children with additional needs. You may still have interventional breakouts. And sometimes it can happen both ways. Sometimes the intervention room has got really good, clear phonics support in it. But when those learners go back to their main classroom, it's gone. The display is not there anymore. The display was only in the intervention. And it can be the other way. The classroom can have really supportive display, but when they're out working on their intervention, the very time when they might need to refer to something, it's not there. It doesn't exist. So think about that. Work on consistency across classes, but of course you need to balance that with age-appropriate progression. So you may want the phonics code shown in every class, but what that looks like, the wall freeze, progresses as children get older, and think about the appropriacy throughout. So consistency, but progression as well. Actively referring to displays, teaching how to use them is another really important one. Another true story, an Ofsted story. In an Ofsted inspection, the Ofsted inspector had noticed in a Key Stage 2 classroom, and it was mixed year groups. Actually, this particular school had mixed 4, 5 and 6. So a challenge to start with, having those 3 age groups, 4, 5 and 6. And the Ofsted inspector had commented negatively in the feedback that when the children were writing in a writing task, the children were spelling lots of words incorrectly. Now, great that they had the confidence and they didn't let that hold them up that they were finding spelling hard. They were still giving this writing a really good go. But the inspector commented that when the children were finding spelling hard and they were getting lots of words wrong, they didn't at any point talk to one another or ask the teacher, how do you spell this? Sir, how do you spell this word? They didn't ever refer to, for example, a spelling mat or a display on the wall to remind them, oh, I'm writing that word with shun at the end. How do I spell that shun ending? Oh yeah, there's a bit on our wall that we can use to help us. The teacher had not picked up on that children were spelling lots of these words wrong. So the children had a misconception about perhaps some of the words. They hadn't done anything, for example, at the beginning of the lesson of go through any vocab, preempt it, have any vocab on display for that lesson, nor did the teacher say, remember children, if you're struggling on your spelling, refer to our literacy wall, our spelling wall, our working wall. That's where you can go to get some help. So that using the display and referring to it is huge, and it's such a quick win, because imagine how, the impact on children of, I'm struggling, I know where to look and what to do. And I always used to have a pointing stick. It was a piece of dowel and it had one of these pointy hands on with a finger, so that I could point to things around my room. By all means, just use your hand or a stick, but literally having a pointing stick with a hand is really useful. And I also used to make some of these pointing sticks for the children when I worked down in reception, and they would be the teacher and they would be pointing as well. So number 6, reflect. Be honest and be brutal. Be tough on yourself. Also be kind on yourself, because be kind on yourself. We're teachers, we work blooming hard, we try our best, we get a lot of things right. And I really feel as a profession in phonics, we're up there. We're doing very well. We're doing great phonics teaching. My job is to push you to the next level of excellence and to help you to support your colleagues across the school. So I do want you to reflect and be honest and be a little bit tough, but be kind. Are your displays accessible? If not, why are they not accessible? Is it because you put them too high because you just forgot to think about it? Or is it because you put them too high because you have a terrible classroom and you have nowhere to display things and you're banging your head against the wall right now going, Abby, you don't understand, my room is terrible. Are they supporting the learning? Are your displays really working for you? And are children benefiting from them? Do they use them to support their recall of the phonics? Do they use them for spelling? Spelling is the huge one. To look at the letter formation, to look at how to spell a word, which words are spelled in which way. How are they using them? When are they using them? Are they being used every single day? They should be. They should be being referred to all the time. Do you remember to refer to them? Sometimes we get set up with great display, we start off good and we start off referring, and other stuff crops up and we just end up letting it slip and we're not referring to it. So have it as a, let's refresh this, let's start referring to them again. How could they be a bit clearer, a bit plainer, a bit more accessible, a bit more supportive? Things to display. So some of the things you might be thinking that, do you need these things in your class? A wall frieze. I would absolutely have, for my phonics, a wall frieze showing the grapheme-phoneme correspondences, showing the mnemonic that we use, and my mnemonic is a key picture next to those shapes, and showing formation. Now, some programs won't have the letter formation on the same resource, the same poster or the same wall frieze as the letter shapes for recognition. And if you need to have letter formation separately, that might be a second display, or you might find a way of adding it or putting it near it. So it's really helpful to have a reminder about letter formation that you can refer to or prompt or show, and these shapes that they're learning for reading. Mine happens to be combined in two, but either or. In this example, you can see that also the letters are positioned on writing lines from very early on, because we're thinking about that letter writing where they sit. Go big or go home. So in the Rocket Phonics program, you print these off and each piece is A5 in size, which for some displays and for some classrooms is the perfect size. You can fit quite a lot of the code, pretty much what you need on a kind of standard display board. Boom, 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 there it is. But if your classroom lends itself more to having the wall frieze, how we used to do quite a few years ago, around the top of the room, like a traditional frieze, A5 is not going to cut it. You need A4. If I'm working in early years and I have got a classroom where I've got a space around the top, I would go up the top, but I would make each piece A4. So that's going to be big. That is going to run all the way around my room. Or if I was so blessed as to have an entire wall, go big. Go A4. So A4 or A5 as it comes, thinking about your display, but definitely the wall frieze. A question I often get asked, should we display the phonics frieze cumulatively as we teach it? So each week that we teach a couple more letter sounds, do we show the children, here's what we're learning about this week, children, or across this period of time, we're going to learn these, I'm going to have them at the front of my room, the display, and then as we finish that, I'm going to pop it on the main phonics display? My answer is all at once. Everything displayed all at once. And my reason for this is, and I changed my mind on this, I used to display it cumulatively because I felt that that would help to engage children with the display as it gradually built up over time. It would enable us to be referring to it. The children could see that sense of building up their knowledge. Anybody coming in the room could see, oh, that's how far we've got. That's what children know. That's what they're expected to know now. So I absolutely used to do it cumulatively until I had Alice in my class. And Alice was the girl who came from nursery, fluently reading and writing when she was 4 years old. Alice was ready to see more of the alphabetic code ahead of where I was teaching it. And when I displayed for Alice more of the code, she self-taught. She was able to look along that phonics chart and look along the code, and she was able to learn things like about the S in her name. So we're all learning S as in the S as in snake, and Alice is going, I've got S in my name, but it's not those letters. And I'm able to say, you're right, Alice, it's the C and the E that are the S in your name. And look, there's some other great words with that spelling, like dance and palace and prince. And here it is up on our phonics display. There is the S spelled in this way. So it takes off that glass ceiling. It opens up the possibility for children to go further and be stretched and be challenged. Obviously, you've got to think about, when it comes to that, the space. You know, what space have we got? How have we got the space to display everything? So it might be that you have your big phonics frieze for what you're working on, you know, the lower down in the code, because we're in reception, but you might have a desktop or a smaller poster or a smaller chart in an area that Alice can go and have a look at that displays the rest of the code so that she has access to it. Also, common exception words as well, or tricky words, whatever you want to call them. It makes sense, absolutely, to have more of those displayed because that's open-ended access, children can access them. But what I frequently see is just this kind of wall of words, often with colourful backgrounds and white font that are really hard to read, small, up too high. It's just a jumble of words, just a big jumble of words. And if you're putting them up in advance altogether, children might recognise a couple, but they're not going to recognise, you know, it's going to be a lot to work through. So for me, I recommend common exception words all at once in termly batches. So you take the first batch of common exception words that you're going to be working on for the next 12 weeks, and that goes up from the beginning, and then you can refer to that incidentally at any time ahead of time. And you're making sure across that 12 weeks that you've taught all of those, that they've embedded those, that they've really got them for reading and spelling. And then for the next full term, the next 12 weeks, you could take those down, make them still available perhaps on a mat, on a support mat, but on your wall display, the next batch of common exception words. So this is a good way of balancing lots up there, but not too much up there. It's what's accessible, it's what we're working on, it's what we need. If you had a really weak cohort who are really, really still struggling with some of the previous ones, of course you can put those up too. So this is where the wall frieze starts to get a bit more complex. This is kind of like the complex part of the code. We're now looking at spelling alternatives and pronunciation alternatives. And again, be thinking about size of those. You know, can you get them to A4? Have you got space? Do you need them as A5? If they're A5, are they low enough that they can be seen really clearly to be useful? And it might be that you do something like, if you don't have a good wall space, but you really want children to be able to access these, you would print these off as A4 or A5, laminate them, hole punch them at the top, and you can get like a kind of metal rings that you can put, you can make a flip book. So they're still out available on display. You've got nowhere that you can put them that's decent, or you've tried, but you know it's not the best space. So how can we double up? What can we do? Can we have things like a flip book where children can look and they can reference and they can sort of have a look at those? Another common question that I get, should we display the phonics that is the age-appropriate phonics or at a lower level if that's where we're at? So for example, people might say, my year one cohort is actually, we're not quite on the year one part of the phonics yet. We're not in phase 5. We're still working down in the reception part of the program. We've lagged behind, we're, you know, embedding a lower level. So do I need to display the year one content, or do I display the reception section, the bit that we're working on or the bit that we should be working on? And my answer is both if possible. So we really should be displaying what we should be working at, the age appropriate. This is the year one classroom. This is the year one content. This is the expectation this year. And some children, even though they're working on the reception part of the content, they will start to access that. They will start to work it out and see all the spelling alternatives. But of course, if children are working at a lower level, of course, they still need previous support. So you might look at having, if you're blessed with space, a continuation of reception into year one, or you might have to have 2 separate displays, the reception content, the year one content, or you might have your biggest, best display is your age appropriate, your expectation, this is what we're working on in year one, and a smaller display or things like the flip charts and the desktops that are aimed at supporting at the lower level until we get to where we really should be. So both if possible. This is what the wall frieze can look like with older children. So this comes from Rocket Phonics Next Steps. And if you imagine that dilemma of you want to display loads of phonics, but you do not have space on your wall for 130 odd letter sound correspondences, how can we logistically do this? We move towards an alphabetic code chart. So an alphabetic code chart actually comes in 6 pieces. These are the first 3 pieces. And you can join them together in a sort of long, thin visual, or you can join them together in a kind of 3x2 or a 2 columns of 3 sheets each. So it fits more in a kind of clumpy square. The problem if you have it in a long column is sometimes the top of it's too high for children and they don't see it and they get really good at the bottom part but not the top part. So to have this with impact on the wall, it needs to be blown up. So really you need this at A3 per piece. A4 per piece on a wall, it's tiny, it's not going to have the impact. You've got to get this blown up bigger and have good quality printing. Or you've got to make sure that where you display this is eye height. It's much lower down and children can go up to the wall and they can use it as a reference chart and they can see it. Wall posters, you might want things like the alphabet up on your wall, and you're going to explain to children that we use alphabetical order to organise things like registers and dictionaries. It's a very, very useful skill to have, knowing this alphabetical order. We tend to learn the alphabet order through the song. So the alphabet song is absolutely brilliant, and this is a nice reference for as you go through the song, I'm referring to it. And we use letter names when we sing the alphabet. But be careful not to be confused that the alphabet is letter names. The alphabet isn't letter names. The alphabet is still phonics. It's still the sounds. It's just that it's useful to learn it through these letter names because of the alphabetical order. And the reason we need to know our letter names is because that's the efficient way of relaying spellings accurately from one person to the next. So in year 1 into year 2, we need to be hammering letter names and getting really good at them. So having an alphabet poster and doing lots of alphabet work, although I would expect alphabet singing from nursery and becoming familiar with that, by the time you get to year 1 into year 2, that's when you're going to hammer it. So it can be useful to have an alphabet poster on display, nice and clear, lowercase and capitals. Sometimes people tie that in with a letter formation poster. That's okay, think about your space. More wall posters, you might think about having groups of words, groups of spellings. As children are getting older and they're starting to, they can read and write a little bit now. We're talking about year 1 into year 2, definitely year 2. This comes from Rocket Phonics Next Steps, the year 2 part of the programme. You might want to display on the wall, again, big enough to be seen. So big, you might take this poster, you might have a huge display space, so you might recreate this poster as a bigger display, or just get it blown up to A3, nice and big and clear. Each of these posters links to a half term. So half term 1, the autumn half term 1, we are working on Sound Family Poster 1. For 4 weeks in the phonics, we're going to be looking at A spellings, E spellings, I spellings, and O spellings. And here are examples of those spellings in words. When it comes to segmenting in phonics, there's 2 aspects to segmenting. The first aspect is being able to segment, being able to take a word like train and hear segmenting, breaking it up. The second part of segmenting is which darned way do we spell these sounds that we can hear. And this is where a lot of children go wrong. They are fine with phonics lower down. When it gets complicated, some are naturally better and some go to pot. And we have to work really, really hard at these words are spelled in this way. These words are spelled in this way. And one of the ways that we can really support with that is gathering words together into word banks and displaying word banks, banks of words that go together, sounds that go together with the different spellings. And so some of those displays might be posters like this, and you might put all 6 of them up. These are all of the spellings that we think about through year 2. Or you might put one of these up for the half term and switch it up for number 2 the next half term, again, thinking about your space. And of course, like also on your wall, I mentioned about tricky words. Again, go big or go home. You might blow these up if you have the space for them. Try not to have that word wall where it's all colourful backgrounds, white font, very small, a sea of words that's really hard to navigate. Think more strategically about these are the ones that we're working on. And when your class have nailed those words, they can read them and they can spell them. You don't need them on your wall anymore. You can take them down. So some things you'll want permanently on the wall. like the alphabetic code that's age appropriate on track and some lower level support, like the alphabet, like letter formation, lowercase and capital letters, print or cursive. And some things you'll put cumulatively on the wall, like spelling word banks. And it can be the ones on the poster, or you can be doing your working wall with flip chart paper. I do a lot of work with children building word banks on flip chart paper and then displaying that on the working wall sort of along the bottom, so they can refer back to it and I can refer back to it. And keeping it up there for as long as I've got the space, but thinking certainly in these 6-week half-term blocks, and that also helps with keeping up and not catching up and staying on track. You also might put up cumulatively words that you see children often misspelling or struggling with. So it might not be something that's in your program as being a tricky word, but it's just a word that they are really getting wrong. They might be putting was and saw back to front. So you might grab a sheet of A4 paper, grab a marker pen, write was, and underneath write saw, SAW, and pop that on the wall and say, children, I've really noticed that loads of us are struggling with this. We keep writing was when we want saw, or saw when we want was, or you might do was with the WAS and say, loads of you are putting an O in the middle. It's not, it's A. I'm going to put this here to remind us. So display can also be ad hoc, on the go, what you need as you need it. And I've mentioned that common exception words I would tend to do termly in batches. And then desktop. Phonics sounds maths as desktops, great. I'm not super keen on having loads of stuff on desks. I like things clearer and, you know, not having things all over the place and dropping on the floor and getting all crumpled. And but they are quite useful. So if you have a good storage system, then yeah, great desktops, and it can help. It can be a way to alleviate the problem if you don't have great wall space. So you've heard everything I've said, you've thought about it, you've come back and gone, sorry, Abby, my walls are terrible. I don't have good display space. This is how you can counteract it. You can use your desktop copies. So desktop phonics mats, thinking about what's appropriate, thinking about the age appropriate desktop mats. And do you need the one that goes ahead because you have some really bright sparks that can access more even though you haven't taught it yet? Or the alternative, do you need the one that came before because you have some learners who still need to access that? And I put there, these are also quite good as posters. You can blow them up to A3, get them done at the professional printers if you've got a rubbish printer, A3, and then you can put it up in children's play areas and they'll get their pointy stick and they will play teacher and they will point at these and test each other and have a little go with them. This is the version of that when you get to slightly older children. So reception year 1, year 2 and beyond. It's the same information, but now you've got way more phonics shown on 2 sheets of A4. So it's a back-to-back, it's an A4 desktop alphabetic code, and it's a reference chart. You've got the sounds down the left-hand column in the sort of darker yellow, and then running across each row, you've got the ways of spelling, and you've got the picture mnemonic system in there as well. So those are really handy for all the way up to year 6. You know, those are aimed for older children as well. And then you might want something, of course, like common exception word mats. These are not inside the Rocket Phonics program because the designers are completely flat out and haven't had a chance that they made them. These are some that I knocked up, and you can access these by emailing me for a copy, hello@abigailsteeletraining.com, or if you're in the Facebook groups, the Phonics Club, my Facebook group, or the Reading Planet Rocket Phonics Teachers group, they're in the files section and you can download these, or you can make your own, but I've tried to just make them nice and clear and colour coordinated to fit in with the books and the phonics teaching. So some final thoughts, and if you're still with me, thank you for sticking with me. I know I've run a bit over, and the irony is every time I do a session I think, I don't know if this is going to last an hour. It might be about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And every session I ever do runs totally over. Anyway, final thoughts. I really hope that I haven't dampened your creativity by poo-pooing beautiful displays, but I just hope that I've made you think. Bigger is better. Simple is better. Make workload easy. Keep it simple, have your annual display with a bit of a working wall cumulatively as appropriate. Phonics displays need to be actively referred to by children and teachers. That's the golden one, actually. Even if you look around your school and you think, oh my gosh, I don't stand a chance. Everybody's display is totally beautiful or chaotic, but not necessarily really effective. if we can just get teachers and children using the display and referring to the display, then that's the most important bit, really, isn't it? So a little bit of a follow-up task for you. Do this by yourself or do this with your staff. I would like you to go back to school, or if you're in school, go back to your classroom, sit on the carpet. I know that's painful getting down there these days and get back over. Sit on the carpet or take a chair in the middle of the classroom. Imagine you are a child. Look around the room at all of the displays and be critical. Are they accessible? Are they useful? Carry out a pupil voice survey. Go to classes and ask children, and this is the kind of thing that an inspector will do. If you get stuck with spelling, where can you look in your classroom to help you? How automatically do those children direct you to a useful display? Do they instantly say, oh, we look over there. Oh, that's our spelling bank for this week. Oh, that's our phonics. If I get stuck, I can just look at that. Oh, if I don't know how to form the letters, I can just look at that handwriting over there. Another way of doing it, walk around the classroom with a couple of children, point to displays and say, what's this display about? Can you tell me about this display? How does this display help you when you're at school? And see what they say. So some really useful actions for you there at the end. By all means, you can come back to me with questions. This session stays recorded and it keeps the chat box on the side. So you can put questions in now, or you can come back at a later time and you can add questions. And I often go through sessions and check chat boxes so that I can add answers in there for people. And then other people who come to watch the session later, they can also see the Q&As that have gone on. Facebook groups, really good place to get in touch with me, particularly Facebook, the Phonics Club. It's my non-program specific. A lot of people are Rocket Phonics, but there's some Key Stage 3 in there as well. And you can be from any program. We don't discriminate. We welcome everybody. That's a good place to ask questions too. Or you can give me feedback or commentary. Give me your thoughts of what you thought of this content. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for sticking with me. Have a fabulous day. And I will see you again another time. Bye.